Several hours later, Manhwa took them to another part of the university. They went to the central building, which was connected with wooden bridges. In one of the rooms there was a drip. Although they did not have many reserve medicines, they had enough. They took the girl's brothers to this room, laid him on the floor on top of a blanket, and connected the drip to him. The man closed his eyes, clenched his teeth tightly, and began to sweat. Duan Ya sat on the floor next to him while she had one hand resting on her knee. She placed the other hand on his chest, turned her head to the other side, and with a serious look explained to the girl that they were no longer in mortal danger for now. The girl who was nearby couldn't help but feel happy and relieved. She thanked Duan Ya, saying that she was the best. In the room where they were, there were also several other people. Some were sitting and others were sleeping. Chen, who had both hands in his pants pockets, began to approach Manhwa and asked if all the students lived here now. Manhwa, who was standing next to her brothers, responded to him with a yes and also added that regardless of whether they were men or women, everyone who was alive took refuge here. Manhwa started to stare at Chen and with a serious look explained that because brother Tian Yu used to help everyone, this place was also considered their territory from the field department. Chen started to look at him with a calm gaze and asked which field department he was talking about. At that moment, someone who had a rifle resting on their shoulder appeared and explained to him that their field department was very strong. Even if they encountered the toady, they could face them. With a serious look, Chen began to wonder who this guy was. Several seconds later, he approached them. He had the rifle resting on his shoulder, carried several knives on his back, wore a diving mask and had good armor. He asked Chen if he was interested in joining them. Manhwa did not take long to recognize this man as Tian Yu. He approached Chen, extended both hands towards him and with a surprised look, asked him to guess who he had brought back. Chen, who had one hand in his pocket, started to look at Tian Yu and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Tian Yu didn't take long to recognize Chen. He quickly took off the diving mask and couldn't help but be open-mouthed and surprised at the same time. He couldn't believe that it was really Chen. Tian Yu jumped towards Chen, gave him a hug, closed his eyes and couldn't help but feel relieved. As he thought that Chen had died, he didn't expect that he was still alive. Chen also became happy since it had been a while since he had seen Tian Yu. For him, it was rare for the two of them to see each other again. He decided to have some drinks because he had just returned to the field department and could spend a few days with him. While sweat was falling from his forehead, he turned his head back and with a surprised look couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Behind them was Duan Ya. Upon seeing her, Tian Yu couldn't help but be dumbfounded and start sweating even more. He had seen her before. She was the legend of their University of Science and Technology, known as the Cold Goddess Duan Ya. She started walking towards them, put her hands behind her back, adopted a seductive pose, and explained to him that these were things of the past which had no use in the present. Tian Yu panicked, and while he was open-mouthed, he began pointing at her with his finger and with a confused look asked Manhwa how it was possible that the legendary goddess had appeared here in front of them dressed as a bunny. Manhwa covered his ears with both fingers, and while he was sweating, he started to look at her and asked him if she really was the older sister Duan Ya from the Faculty of Medicine. It didn't surprise him that she was so beautiful. Duan Ya approached Chen, put her hand on his chest, started looking into his eyes with a loving gaze, began to blush, and explained that she wanted to change clothes. Dressing like this in front of the students was too embarrassing for her. Chen put his hand on her waist, started looking at her and with a smile thought it was time for her to change clothes. Manhwa and Tian Yu couldn't help but feel jealous. Manhwa clenched both fists tightly and with an angry look asked him why Chen was hugging the goddess. Tian Yu started bleeding from his nose. He was very furious as he couldn't believe that the goddess Duan Ya was with Chen. Tian Yu took them to the door of another room. He left his backpack on the floor, extended his hands towards the door, apologized to her since it was a bit messy here. He told them they could sit wherever they wanted, and also told her that she could change clothes in this room. She started approaching the room and thanked him. Seeing that this room was luxurious, Chen couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. Manhwa turned his back on them, started to look around with a surprised look, and couldn't help but feel envious seeing that this was how Tian Yu used his contribution points. Tian Yu leaned against the wall, put his hand under his chin and remembered that they hadn't brought any luggage. He didn't know where she was going to get clothes to change into. Chen changed the subject and with a serious look asked him if his missions were usually dangerous. Tian Yu started touching his mask with his finger and asked him which mission wasn't dangerous. According to him, they were very lucky. They were clean and it was noticeable that they hadn't gone through the trials of the apocalypse. He asked them not to leave here and requested that they join their team so he could take care of them. He opened his eyes, and with a serious look revealed to Chen that even doctors as excellent as Duan Ya didn't even need to go out looking for food. She was just going to take care of the wounded. He started staring at Chen and decided to remind them of something. He advised them in the future to stop showing off everywhere. He couldn't believe that Chen could allow her to dress like a sexy bunny. He didn't know what he was thinking. He also reminded him that they were in the apocalypse. Chen slightly turned his head back, and with a calm look, asked him not to worry as he was going to take good care of her. Tian Yu approached him, gave him a gentle punch on the head, and asked him to keep his word. He also asked if he had forgotten who had been bullied in high school and hadn't dared to defend himself. It had been him who helped chase those guys away. At the same time, Duan Ya entered the room and she started to take off her clothes. Tian Yu revealed to Chen that Captain Guo was not a good person. The women he liked never had a good ending, especially women as beautiful as Duan Ya. According to him, Captain Guo was not going to give up. While she was taking off her bunny costume, someone who was behind started approaching her and prepared to attack. This person took out a knife, put it in front of her neck and gave the order not to move. This person was none other than Na. Duan Ya couldn't help but feel terror. With a terrified look, she asked her who she was and what she wanted to do to her. Na put a hand on her chest, approached her, stuck out her tongue, and revealed to her that Captain Guo had asked her to come help him organize Duan Ya's accommodation. She closed her eyes, got even closer to her, and explained to her that after all, she was a girl who naturally couldn't be with these losers. Duan Ya got a bit nervous, opened her mouth and with a calm look told her that there was enough space here so they didn't have to worry about her. While Duan Ya was touching her chest, Na put her hand on her abdomen and explained that this couldn't be possible since the captain especially wanted her to come. Duan Ya started to use her power, and while her eyes were shining, she told her again that she was not going to leave. The power of Duan Ya began to affect Na. Her eyes also started to shine and she couldn't help but start sweating. Duan Ya gave her the order to release her. Upon hearing this order, Na moved the knife away from her neck, took several steps back and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and began to wonder what was happening. While Duan Ya had one hand under her breasts, she turned towards Na and started staring at her intently. Although it was difficult for her to control Na with her power, she could still control her for a short period of time. Na stood still, began looking at the ground and made no movement. Duan Ya decided to take advantage of this. She started approaching the door and decided to let Chen handle the rest. But at that moment, Na started to move again. She began to move the knife and prepared to attack. She grabbed the knife tightly and instead of attacking Duan Ya, she stabbed the knife into her own hand. Due to the intense pain, she clenched her teeth tightly and began to scream in pain. Duan Ya started to look back and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but be in shock. She couldn't believe that Na had chosen to stab the knife into her own hand. She was using the pain to force herself to wake up from the mind control. With a murderous look, Na began to advance towards Duan Ya and prepared to finish her off. She approached her and while holding the knife with one hand, she pushed her with the elbow of the other, making her body hit the wall. She started to stare into her eyes, clenched her teeth tightly and prepared to attack. With a serious look, she told her that she had almost fallen into her trap and also thought that Duan Ya was a very strange girl. Duan Ya started to sweat and with a terrified look thought that this was not good. At that moment, someone began to knock on the door and asked her what was happening and why she was making so much noise while changing clothes. Seeing this, Na put her hand over Duan Ya's mouth to prevent her from speaking. She turned her head towards the door and with a serious look thought that this was not good. Seeing that no one was responding, the person knocking on the door decided to enter inside. Several seconds later, Chen knocked the door down. Seeing this, Na let go of Duan Ya. She started looking towards the door and with a serious look asked him if he was looking for trouble. She gathered momentum, began to advance towards Chen and with a determined look decided to finish him off. As she was slowly approaching, Chen simply stood still without making any movement. At that moment, Tian Yu appeared, and with a surprised look asked Chen to be careful. Upon hearing the name Chen, Na's expression changed drastically. She couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating. She didn't know what was happening. As she got a little closer, she saw that the person who had knocked down the door was none other than Chen. He began to stare into her eyes in silence. She didn't take long to recognize him, and upon doing so, she was left open-mouthed and started to sweat. She couldn't believe it was him. In a matter of seconds, her eyes filled with terror, and she began to remember what had happened at the engineering university. She remembered how the monster Chen had massacred everyone. Simply using his sharp claws, he grabbed the leader by the neck, started staring into his eyes intently, and began to smile. It didn't take her long to realize that the guy in front of her was a demon. Chen adopted an offensive stance, began to stare at Na with a piercing look and prepared to attack. Although she had also killed many people, her intuition told her that if she attacked him, then she would die. She began to tremble and with a look full of terror decided to do something to prevent this from happening. Tian Yu put his hand in front of Chen to protect him from her attack. But at that moment something happened that no one expected. He couldn't help but stay in shock and start wondering what was happening. Instead of attacking, she threw herself to the ground, placed both hands on it, bowed her head before him and prostrated herself before him. Chen didn't even move. He started looking at the ground and remained silent. Duan Ya turned around and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. With a surprised look, she began to wonder what was happening and why she was behaving in this manner. While Na had both legs and both hands on the ground, she began to crawl towards Chen. She started looking into his eyes, called him master, and asked him to please punish her. Tian Yu started to sweat, turned his head back and with a confused look began to wonder why she was calling Chen master. While he had both hands in his pants pockets, his body began to emit a powerful pink energy. With a serious look, he asked her who her master was. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.